What's up? Welcome to Time Alone with God, TAG. It's an election year, and I bet you've heard a lot about leadership. You yourself might have taken some time to reflect on leaders and how leaders function. Just before we move on, the yellow says nothing about affiliations and anything, because you have to be careful about what you dress in the streets of Nairobi. When I think about leadership and how we function in our lives with leadership, we basically need it everywhere. In the church, in the political space as a country, in our homes, and many of us are going to be making decisions about leaders in this coming year. And what better place than to look in the scriptures about leaders and how they led us. What wonderful stories we have of leaders in the Bible. I think of guys like Abraham. In a way, he's a leader of a community, of his family as he leads it in the various steps. He takes his family, leads them to where God is calling them to be. Think about guys like Moses and Elijah and Daniel, and all these people exhibited an attribute around leadership. But when growing up, there is one story that really stuck in my mind. This was the story of Joseph and his leadership in the many places that we see him lead. Whether it's in Potiphar's house or whether he's in jail. Just in case you're not familiar with this story, there's a guy called Jacob in the Bible, and he has 12 sons, and one of them happens to be Joseph. When Joseph is a favorite of the father, and so at one time, it drives a wedge between him and his siblings. And they end up at one point deciding, you know what? Because of the prospects of you leading us and everything, you've been having dreams about leading us and how we are to honor you in the future, they decide to sell him into slavery. And they sell him, and he ends up in the house of a man called Potiphar. This is found in the book of Genesis, chapter 39. Let me turn there so that we can read. This is what it says about Joseph and his life in the family and in the household of Potiphar. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. I think there are two phrases that are found quite significant in just those first 4 verses. And that phrase that appears twice is actually that the Lord was with Joseph. I think about when we are called to pray in 1 Timothy chapter 2. Paul is asking Timothy about how to conduct affairs in the church. And one of the things he says is people should pray for their leaders. And one of the things that I ask myself when I come across this passage is how often do I pray for them and for leaders in society and leaders in the church that the Lord will be with them. The defining aspect about Joseph and all the success, as you read it, you can see how Potiphar entrusted all to him. He became a leader. You can imagine he is a foreigner, sold into slavery, rises up the ranks and is now a leader in somebody's home. Not just anyone, but the captain of the king of the Pharaoh's guard. Imagine that. This is a guy who's, maybe you'd say, is chief of all security in a country, and he has decided to entrust his household to a foreigner who came in as a slave into his home. In thinking about this, you can see God's favor and grace upon him, and that defining aspect of the Lord was with him. And this is not the only place. As you scroll forward in the story, he gets into trouble with the wife of Potiphar, and he ends up being jailed. And we see later on in chapter 39, you can scroll down, in verse 20, Joseph has been put in prison. And even there, the master, he finds favor with the master God. This is what it says in verse 20. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. You can see how much power Potiphar had. He puts you in where the king puts his prisoners. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Remember, you opened by two phrases around the fact that the Lord was with Joseph. And here in closing, we have in verse 21, the Lord was with him. And in verse 23, we still see that the Lord was with Joseph. A significant thing about leaders. He rises to all positions of influence because of this significant thing. And he's a great leader because of the same significant thing. The Lord was with him. I'd like to challenge us in the various spaces that we find ourselves. How often do we think about whether the Lord is with someone when we appoint leaders in the places of authority? We have various ways in which people become leaders. Some of us are already in authority and appoint others to places of authority. Some of us are leaders and we get to nominate people into authority. Some of us find ourselves with the opportunity to vote. And therefore we think about who should be the next MCA, who should be the next MP, senator, or even the next president. And as we go to cast our ballot, how often do we ask ourselves, who has the Lord by his side? Who has the Lord in his team? When I even think of when choose a spouse, because even a home needs a leader. I don't know how often we ask ourselves, does this person have the Lord on his side? And how will they lead our family into the future? When we even consider aspects such as when we find ourselves in positions of authority, or when we find ourselves being asked to take up positions of leadership, do we sometimes cower because we think, I don't have the experience? Talk about experience to Joseph, who's just been thrown into a foreign land and he's leading a whole home. Or, who has experience in prison so that you can know how to run the affairs in a prison. But we who have the Lord on our side, do we look down upon ourselves, asking ourselves that we need other qualifications for us to actually have success in our leadership? Or do we look at the fact that we actually have the Lord on our side, and that is enough for great leadership? For we can trust that he will grant us favor with the people we lead, those whom we interact with, and even those who are under us in the places of authority. And so I'd like for us to reflect on that into the year and into the various positions that we will find ourselves in. If the Lord is on our side, who can be against us in that one aspect of leadership? I'm reminded of the Proverbs. In Proverbs 29, I think it's in verse 2, it talks about leaders and how when you have great guys, righteous people rising up to positions of influence, authority, and when the righteous thrive, you know what happens? Everyone rejoices. But when those who are not righteous, allow me to turn there and just read to you that. Proverbs 29 verse 2. When the righteous thrive, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. I find it interesting that sometimes we shrink from positions of leadership and authority for various reasons. Fear or a sense of incapacitation or lack of skill. But this one thing I see in the life of Joseph, that if the Lord is by your side, and if you have the Lord guiding you and encouraging you and granting you favor with people, leadership and success comes from Him. So may you rejoice, be glad, take up the opportunities to lead, and rejoice and think about leaders, and think about leaders who have God by their side, and pray that God would grant them success, so that in our companies, in our homes, in our political space, in all these spaces, we will find ourselves rejoicing, for we have leaders who are righteous. That's it for Tag, Time Alone with God. See you next week.